Imagine holding in your hands an artifact that could rewrite everything we know about ancient technology. Simple clay jar, barely 6 inches tall, discovered in the ruins of an ancient village near Baghdad. It's inside. Copper and iron arranged in a configuration that to modern eyes looks suspiciously like a battery. Could ancient Mesopotamians have harnessed electricity 2,000 years before? Alessandro Volta invented the first modern battery. Or is this one of archaeology's most persistent mysteries? Case of seeing what we want to see in the fragments of the past? Welcome back to Whispered Chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore, where we peer into the shadows of history and sift through the strange, the puzzling, and the long-forgotten. Today we're diving deep into the Baghdad Battery, examining the evidence, the theories, the controversies that have made this artifact one of the most debated objects in archaeological history. Our story begins in 1936 in Kujet Rabu, a small village just outside Baghdad, Iraq. German archaeologist Wilhelm Kigg was working as the director of the National Museum of Iraq's laboratory when he made a discovery that would puzzle researchers for decades. Among the artifacts excavated from Parthian-era ruins, dating somewhere between 150 BCE and 650 CE, King found a collection of unusual clay jars. These weren't your typical storage vessels. Each jar stood about 5 to 6 inches tall, and inside they contained something extraordinary. A copper cylinder with an iron rod suspended through its center. Now, here's what made Koenig's mind start racing. The copper cylinder was soldered shut at the bottom using a lead-tin alloy. The iron rod, meanwhile, was held in place at the top by what appeared to be an asphalt seal. The rod didn't touch the sides of the copper cylinder. It was carefully suspended in the middle. To King's trained eye, this configuration looked hauntingly familiar. It resembled, in its basic structure, a galvanic cell, what we would call a battery. In 1938, King published his theory. He proposed that these ancient Parthians had discovered electrochemical principles and used these devices to electroplate gold onto silver objects, a technique that would have given their jewelry and decorative items a lustrous golden coating. It was a bold claim. Revolutionary even. True, it meant that electrical technology predated the scientific revolution by nearly 2 millennia. But King's proposal landed in a world on the brink of chaos. World War II was beginning, and his paper didn't receive the scientific scrutiny it might have in peacetime. The artifacts themselves. Many were stored in the Baghdad Museum, where they would wait for decades before serious experimental testing began. Let's get technical for a moment, because understanding what the Baghdad Battery actually is matters more than speculation about what it could be. The typical Baghdad Battery consists of 3 main components. First, there's a terracotta clay jar, roughly cylindrical, about 13 to 14 centimeters tall and 8 centimeters in diameter. Nothing too unusual there. Parthian-era pottery is well documented. Second, inside the jar sits a copper cylinder, roughly 9 centimeters long and 2.6 centimeters in diameter. This copper sheet has been rolled into a tube and soldered at the bottom with a lead-tin alloy. The soldering is crude by modern standards, but functional. Third, there's an iron rod partially corroded. As you'd expect from iron that's been buried for 2,000 years, suspended through the center of the copper cylinder, the rod is held in place by an asphalt stopper at the top of the jar. Crucially, the iron rod doesn't touch the copper cylinder. There's a gap, a space between the two metals. And if you know anything about electrochemistry, alarm bells might be ringing in your head right now. Because this configuration, 2 dissimilar metals separated by a gap that could hold an electrolyte solution, is exactly what you need to create a voltaic cell. Fill that jar with an acidic liquid like vinegar or lemon juice, and you've got yourself a primitive battery that could, theoretically, produce somewhere between 0.8 and 2 volts of electricity. Researchers who have examined the artifacts note that some of the jars show evidence of having contained acidic substances based on corrosion patterns. Others appear to have contained scrolls or other organic materials that have long since decomposed. And that's where things get complicated. So let's explore the most exciting possibility that these jars were actually functioning batteries. If the ancient Parthians did use these as batteries, what would they have used them for? Koenig's original theory pointed to electroplating, the process of using electrical current to deposit a thin layer of metal onto an object. The logic here is compelling. We know that Parthian and later Sasania craftsmen created exquisite jewelry and decorative objects, Some of these artifacts show what appears to be gold gilding so thin and uniform that modern metallurgists have wondered how it was achieved. Traditional gilding techniques like mercury gilding or gold leaf application leave distinctive traces. But some Parthian artifacts show gold coatings that are remarkably even and thin, consistent with what electroplating could produce. In the 1970s, researchers at General Electric attempted to recreate the Baghdad Battery. They filled a replica jar with grape juice as an electrolyte, something that would have been readily available in ancient Mesopotamia. The result? It successfully generated about half a volt of electricity and used it to electroplate a small silver figurine with gold. The experiment worked. Technically, the Baghdad Battery could function as a battery. Willard Gray, a researcher at the General Electric High Voltage Laboratory, successfully reproduced electroplating effects using the ancient design. Other modern experimenters have achieved similar results using various electrolytes, including vinegar, wine, and even fermented palm wine. But here's the critical question. Just because something could work as a battery doesn't mean it was used as a battery. This is where archaeology gets frustratingly ambiguous. If these were batteries, we'd expect to find additional evidence: wiring, electroplated objects in the same archaeological context, written records describing electrical phenomena or electroplating processes, or at the very least, multiple batteries wired in series to generate useful voltage. We haven't found any of that. Not definitively, anyway. So, if these weren't batteries, what were they? The most widely accepted alternative theory among mainstream archaeologists is that these jars were used to store sacred scrolls. This explanation might sound less exciting, but it fits the archaeological context much better. Dr. St. John Simpson, an expert on Mesopotamian archaeology at the British Museum, has examined the Baghdad Battery artifacts extensively. He notes that similar jars, without the internal copper and iron components, have been found throughout the Parthian world. Many of these clearly contain papyrus scrolls, the asphalt seal at the top, perfect for protecting documents from moisture. The copper cylinder. It could have served as a protective casing for particularly valuable scrolls. The iron rod, possibly a support structure, or a rolled scroll itself. This theory is reinforced by the archaeological context. Most of these jars were found in contexts associated with religious or ceremonial use. It's not workshops or industrial sites where electroplating might have occurred. Another compelling alternative is that these objects were used in traditional medicine or religious rituals. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe numerous medicinal and magical practices involving copper and iron, often in combination with organic substances. The jars could have been containers for herbs, compounds, or offerings that involve these metals for their symbolic or supposed healing properties. There's also the possibility, and this is important, that these are just a coincidental arrangement of materials. Sometimes a copper tube with an iron rod is just a copper tube with an iron rod, not an ancient superweapon or a technological marvel. Dr. Paul Craddock, a metallurgy expert, has pointed out that the soldering techniques used on the copper cylinders are consistent with other Parthian metalwork, but show no signs of the specific modifications you'd expect. If someone was intentionally trying to optimize electrical current flow, let's talk about what's missing from the battery theory. Because in archaeology, what you don't find is often as important as what you do. First, there's no ancient text. Not a single cuneiform tablet, papyrus fragment, or inscription that describes electrical phenomena or anything resembling battery technology. The Mesopotamians were prolific record keepers. They wrote about everything from astronomical observations to beer recipes. If they had discovered how to harness electricity, wouldn't they have written about it? Second, there are no electroplated objects that definitively date to the Parthian period with the Ixian chemical signatures we'd expect from electroplating. Some objects show thin gold coatings, yes, but these can be explained by traditional gilding techniques. Third, the archaeological context is problematic. These jars weren't found in workshops or alongside other tools that would suggest industrial use. They were found in religious sites, alongside scrolls, pottery, and other ceremonial objects. Fourth, there is no evidence of electrical knowledge elsewhere in the ancient world that would support the battery theory. No other culture from that period shows any understanding of electricity. The Parthians weren't isolated. They traded extensively with Rome, China, and India. If they had battery technology, why didn't it spread? And finally, there's the Occam's razor problem. When multiple explanations exist for something, the simplest one that fits all the evidence is usually correct. The scroll storage theory requires no technological leaps, no lost knowledge, and no rewriting of history. The battery theory requires all of those things. Despite the skepticism from mainstream archaeology, the Baghdad Battery has captured the public imagination in ways few artifacts have. It's been featured in countless documentaries, books, and television shows, most notably appearing in popular series about ancient aliens and lost civilizations. These shows often present the battery theory as fact, overlooking the substantial evidence against it. The mythology has taken on a life of its own. Some fringe theorists have claimed these batteries powered ancient computers, were used in advanced medical treatments, or even prove that ancient astronauts visited Earth and shared technology with primitive humans. But here's what modern rigorous testing has shown. In 2005, the Discovery Channel's Mythbusters team built Baghdad Battery replicas and tested them extensively. Their conclusion? Yes, you can generate electricity with the design, about 4 volts when wired in series. But the current was so weak that its practical applications would have been extremely limited. Electroplating was theoretically possible, but incredibly inefficient compared to traditional methods available at the time. Professor Elizabeth Stone, an archaeologist at Stony Brook University, who has extensively studied Mesopotamian technology, has pointed out that while the batteries could generate electricity, there's no evidence they ever did in ancient times. The distinction matters. Moreover, the few Baghdad Battery artifacts that survived to modern times were scattered when the Baghdad Museum was looted during the Iraq War in 2003. Some pieces were lost or destroyed, making further scientific analysis of the original artifacts nearly impossible. The Baghdad Battery controversy reveals something important about how we approach ancient artifacts and interpret the past. There's a natural human tendency to project our modern understanding onto ancient objects. When Wilhelm Kigg looked at those jars in 1936, he saw them through the lens of 20th century electrical knowledge. He recognized the configuration because he understood batteries. But a Parthian looking at the same object might have seen something entirely different. This is called presentism, interpreting the past through the values, knowledge, and assumptions of the present. It's a trap every archaeologist has to work consciously to avoid. The Baghdad Battery has become what archaeologists call an out-of-place artifact, or UPART, something that seems too advanced for its time period. These artifacts tend to attract sensational theories because they offer the tantalizing possibility that ancient peoples were more advanced than we think, and honestly, that impulse comes from a good place. It's about respecting ancient ingenuity, recognizing that people thousands of years ago were every bit as intelligent as we are today. They just had different knowledge and different priorities. But here's the thing. Ancient peoples achieved astonishing feats of engineering, art, medicine, and mathematics without needing lost electrical technology. The Parthians built sophisticated irrigation systems, created beautiful metalwork using traditional techniques, and maintained one of the most powerful empires of their age. That's impressive enough without adding batteries to the mix. So where does mainstream archaeology stand on the Baghdad Battery today? The consensus view among archaeologists and ancient technology experts is that these artifacts were most likely storage vessels for scrolls or ceremonial objects. While the battery theory is acknowledged as technically possible, it's considered highly unlikely given the complete absence of supporting evidence. Dr. Paul Craddock, former keeper of the Department of Conservation and Scientific Research at the British Museum, has written extensively on this topic. His conclusion, the suggestion that they were batteries is not impossible, but it's not probable. There are much simpler explanations that fit the evidence better. The academic community hasn't closed the door entirely. New evidence could always emerge. But the burden of proof rests with those claiming extraordinary technological capabilities. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and so far, that evidence doesn't exist. What's more interesting to many modern archaeologists is what the Baghdad Battery reveals about the interpretation of artifacts and the public's relationship with archaeological discoveries. Why does the battery theory remain so popular despite limited evidence? What does that tell us about our own desires to see the past in a certain way? These are questions that go beyond archaeology, into psychology, culture, and the human need for mystery and wonder. So, was the Baghdad Battery a 2,000-year-old power source? Based on the evidence we have today, almost certainly not. But does that make it less fascinating? Absolutely not. The Baghdad Battery stands as a reminder that ancient artifacts can surprise us, challenge our assumptions, and reveal gaps in our understanding. It's a reminder that the past is more complex and ambiguous than we often imagine. Wilhelm Kegg saw something in those clay jars that sparked his imagination. He might have been wrong about what they were, but he was right to be curious, right to question, and right to test his hypotheses. That's the spirit of good archaeology. Not jumping to sensational conclusions, but rather carefully examining evidence, considering multiple explanations, and remaining open to new discoveries. The ancient Parthians were remarkable people who built an empire, developed sophisticated administrative systems, and created beautiful works of art that survive to this day. They don't need to have invented batteries to earn our respect and admiration. But the mystery, the debate, the ongoing investigation, that's what makes archaeology endlessly fascinating. Maybe someday we'll find definitive evidence that tips the scales one way or another. Maybe a Parthian text will surface describing these jars and their use. Maybe new archaeological excavations will uncover workshops with dozens of these devices wired together. Maybe chemical analysis will reveal residues that prove electroplating. Or maybe we'll confirm what most archaeologists already suspect, that these were simple storage vessels that, through a quirk of design, happen to resemble batteries to our modern eyes. Either way, the search for answers continues. And that's the real power of artifacts like the Baghdad Battery. Not the electricity they may or may not have generated, but the questions they inspire and the curiosity they ignite in everyone who encounters them. Thank you for watching Whispered Chronicles, Echoes of Forgotten Lore, and for wandering through this mystery with me. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient enigmas, let me know what artifact, legend, or piece of forgotten history you'd like me to explore next. Until then, take care, and as always, stay safe.